Vixen Season 2, Episode 2. Now, this episode I thought was pretty interesting, mostly for the fact that one of the characters looked exactly like Hugo Strange, but they gave him, it was a random thief guy or whatever. That really surprised me. I was like, oh, they're putting Hugo Strange in this, because Hugo Strange is, for those of you who might not watch Gotham, he's been in that recently. He was like a big part of the last season, and he had like an appearance, and he might come back, this season. But they show this dude who is a bald head guy. He has the circular, glasses and everything, and he's got, he has more hair, I'd say, than normal. But this guy comes in, I'm like, oh, they're putting or not Doctor Strange, but Hugo Strange. He's technically a doctor, so I call him Doctor Strange, but I can't do that anymore. But Hugo Strange comes in, I'm like, oh, they're putting him in here. That's interesting. They're, doing two versions of him now. And then he gets called like a totally different name. I was like, oh, this is just some random dude who looks exactly like Hugo Strange. Just maybe, I guess you could say he looks younger and skinnier, but that was such a weird design. Like, they would have to know that people would be like, this guy looks exactly like Hugo Strange, just, different, beard hair, I guess. So that was really weird. I was kind of right with my guess, though, that, when I was like halfway through my thought process for them doing like the sort of time skipping thing, I was like, oh, they did that last season. It wasn't the end of the season. It was actually like in the middle. This wasn't even the middle. It was just the second episode, and they did the little flash forward thing. So I'm excited to get into the third episode, and this guy, he hires this random Jones dude who looks exactly like Hugo Strange to get him these jewels. And of course, he puts on the amulet. He gets his fire powers. He sets that dude on fire, sends him out the window. And now we're gonna get some sort of connection between this guy and Vixen's mother, because he knew who she was. He says, you look just like your mother. So there probably won't be an exact explanation for that in the next episode, but hopefully there's at least, I'm sure there'll be at least a hint towards it. But I'm excited to see what they do with this guy. At this point, he's just the random villain from Africa who wanted the jewels. Maybe he's a part of one of the former tribes, or he simply knows about it, because in the last season, I kind of thought it was like, oh, you have to be chosen a little bit, and in a sense, you kind of do have to be chosen, but not really. So anyone can kind of wear these amulets, but maybe you have to be from the bloodline, because the guy makes a joke in the last episode like it's yet to give me powers or whatever. But considering his character, he might have actually tried to get superpowers, because considering what he did in the last season, he might have actually given it a shot, like, well, let me see what happens. So I think you do at least have to be from that bloodline, and this character probably knows that he is, so he's like, alright, well, I'm gonna get this amulet. I don't know if he has to be from the same bloodline of the original people that got that specific amulet. That's something that they might have to really explain. Like, if only people from, Vixen's bloodline can do that, and only people from his bloodline can use the fire amulet and stuff. But we'll have to see what happens. They sadly don't do what I was hoping would happen by the end of the last episode. They do a little skip, and it's like, oh, she wakes up in the hospital, no big deal. I was like, oh, I kind of would have liked to see some of the action, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense not to do that, because it's such a short story. They kind of have to skip over stuff, and they're going right into another action sequence, or half of it at least, because it ends where the first episode started. So we got to see what happened after Vixen was knocked out the window and after the guy jumped out. So I would assume it's going to pick up after that portion, and we already see it. But if I remember right, that's not what they did in the last season. I think they actually showed everything, but that was also like 4 episodes in. This is like the very next episode. They're already back at that little recap point. So when they did it in the first season, it was like in episode 1, and then like I think it was still only episode 3. It wasn't that far apart. It was either like episode 3 or 4. But this is like episode 1 and episode 2. So I'm hoping they don't waste time. It was only like a minute or so that they had even showed, but considering it's only like 5 minutes long, I don't want a minute wasted of content I saw from the first episode. So I'm hoping they don't do that like they did last season, because I remember being upset with that before. Like, we already saw this, and we only get 5 minutes anyway. This is not the time to show, reuse animation for us to see. It's like we already saw it. So I hope that doesn't happen in this next episode, but I enjoyed the little bit, that was in here. There really wasn't much to it at all. It was like, alright, this guy's obviously going to be the villain because we saw him in the first episode. So there wasn't really anything new that was added to it. It was just like we got to see Vixen's dad. And that was about it. They talk about the diamonds being stolen from the museum and stuff, which I don't know why they didn't use an actual Detroit museum, because we don't, unless I'm mistaken, we don't have a museum called the Detroit Historical Museum, but we do have the Detroit Institute of Arts, which is like insanely famous. I don't know why they didn't just use the DIA, but I don't know if they'd have to pay for that. I would assume it's just, you just say what it is and no big deal. But I thought it was when I was like, they could have legitimately used the DIA. Like, that's an actual famous thing. Like, in the country, like, a lot of people come to Detroit to go to the DIA. So I was like, it's kind of weird that they would have to make that up, because we actually have a real famous museum that people know about. So I thought that was interesting that they use like a different name. I was like, huh, okay, whatever. But, I completely forgot. I didn't mention this in the first episode, but I was like, oh yeah, I forgot she's even from Detroit, even though, the place, it doesn't look anything like Detroit. But, it was still a fine episode. We'll see what happens in this next one. I really hope they don't reuse animation from the episode just before it, and we only get like basically a 4-minute episode, because like I said, they're already short enough as is. So I am excited for the next one, because I do want to see them fight a little bit longer, because like I said in my last review, I love the animation on the fire, because it's it wasn't as cool in this one as it was in the first one, because it was basically like he was just engulfed in flames and he shot fire out of his hand. But in the first episode, when he like jumps out of the building and there's like fire swirling around him and then it vanishes, that looked really cool. It's like clearly he was controlling and manipulating the fire to swirl around him and then disappear. And I was like, that's actually great. That looked really cool. So I hope they show more of that in the next episode. But I'm excited to get into it. Of course, want to know what you guys thought about this short little episode. So please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts, your least favorite parts. And now that we have our villain and Vixen kind of meeting each other, I want to know how important you guys think Vixen's mom is going to be to this season's story. I would assume, because the next episode, episode 3, is already out, we only have 3 more episodes to go, unless it's an extended season, this time around. So I want to know how important you guys think Vixen's mom is actually going to be in this season. Because basically it's like, oh, her mom is dead, but if this guy knew her, is it because, that means Vixen is like half from, the bloodline she didn't know in general because she was adopted. So is she like, from both bloodlines technically, so she could use her current amulet as well as this fire amulet? Is that why this guy knows her mother, or is it just, something totally different? So I want to know your theories and what you thought about this episode in general, so please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.